Welcome to Faith and Culture Now. Today I'm joined with Raynie Gibbs. Raynie, thanks for being here.
Glad to be here.
So I'm really excited about doing this video with you because we've known each other for a really long time.
Yes, we won't say how many years.
Yeah, enough. So, we kind of grew up together, and we're going to be talking today about grief. We're going to be talking about the process of losing someone that you love and sort of walking through how that affects you and how you overcome that. And in this particular situation, the person that we both lost was a friend, and it's sort of an unusual situation. Typically, people, who are lost to, say, cancer or old age or things like that.
Yes.
You sort of have an idea of what's coming. You sort of have this feeling of, I'm going to prepare for this. And when you lose someone who's young and it's unexpected, completely unexpected, it's hard to prepare for that.
Yes.
And so what I'm going to do now is just sort of turn it over to you and let you sort of tell a little bit of your side of, maybe kind of what happened, what led up to it, and then how you sort of processed it.
Great. After graduating high school, I moved away to college, and I lived in the dorm for a year. But after living in the dorm for a year, I wanted to be off campus in an apartment. I was done with that environment. And Stephanie and I moved in together into an apartment off campus. And we were both part of a Christian sorority at our university. We spent a lot of time together going to events, but she worked pretty much full-time and went to school. So most of her time was spent working, going to school. I was going to school full-time, just worked part-time. So if it wasn't a specific event, we were kind of like ships passing in the night, as many college students are, trying to juggle so many things. The last year we were living together, I had just gotten engaged. My mother had been diagnosed with cancer, which was also a very stressful time. And I was getting ready to take the MCATs because I was planning to go to medical school. So even more so, I was busy and just not paying attention to that relationship as much, which led to a little bit more guilt later on for me. But at the end of that semester, I had left to go home for a bridal shower because I'd gotten engaged, and that weekend she stayed home in the apartment, and she was murdered that weekend. It was Memorial Day weekend, which is coming up, so it's always a sensitive anniversary for me. The assailant has never been caught, so it is still an unsolved crime, and there are a lot of unanswered questions. So along with the traumatic event, there are big question marks in my mind about the details and the whys. Many times I feel like when people lose somebody, there are a lot of questions to God. Why did you allow this to happen? But along with those types, I had who would do this? Why would they do this? Why haven't you caught this person? Almost 20 years later, it would be 19 years this Memorial Day, I still have those unanswered questions. But we were both very normal, typical college students, just going to school. So to even imagine that anyone would want to cause her harm was unthinkable. So being blindsided would be an understatement that this happened.
Yeah.
I couldn't imagine anyone wanting to hurt her. She was kind, she was funny, full of life. So to know that she experienced pain was awful and gut-wrenching. To know that I was gone that weekend was double hurtful because I felt like, what if I had been home? What could I have done to help? Then, as the police began to interrogate everyone that she knew, trying to get to the bottom of it, asking about different people she hung out with at work or that she had met outside of school that I didn't know, I hadn't been paying attention as much because of how busy I had been, then I had even more guilt, like why didn't I pay closer attention to know some of these answers? And I began to be very angry with myself for those reasons, very angry with God for allowing it to happen. But because the investigation stalled and no one has ever been apprehended, there's no suspect, so to speak, there was fear that began to creep in. If God allowed it to happen to her, why wouldn't he allow it to happen to anybody else or to me, other people that I love? And since I had no idea who it was, could it come at any time? So for the very first, I would say 12 months almost after the fact, fear was the ruling emotion that I had. Thinking that someone could be after me, never wanting to be alone. And up until that point in my life, I had always felt safe. I had parents that took care of me. I always had meals. I lived in not like the best neighborhood, but safe. There were no gunshots, those kinds of things.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
to have this overwhelming sense of fight or flight all the time, I never turned off. It was impossible to have a normal sleep schedule. And then when I did, I would have horrible nightmares. And it took a good year before I could be alone by myself. Someone was always with me. I requested that. I felt like I needed that. I didn't trust God at that point for my own protection.
Yeah.
And so that was a shift in faith for me because I had never once questioned that. He would take care of me. And so it was a struggle to get back to feeling that trust in God.
I think in sort of coming from my perspective on it, I had gone, at the time I was working at a bank. I had gone home for lunch and I got a call from a lady named Sandy who was one of our friends' parents.
Yes.
And she said, "Hey, are you sitting down? I need to talk to you." And she said, "I know you guys are all planning to get together tonight, and I need you to know that Stephanie, who was coming home today, is not coming home." And I said, "Oh, well, what's going on?" And she said, "Well, last night she was murdered." And they don't really know a lot of details at this point, but apparently someone either followed her home from work or did something, broke into the apartment, and she was killed. And so it was incredibly shocking to me.
Yes.
And I remember I had just fixed a sandwich, and I think I just sat and looked at the sandwich, and then I went back to work, but I don't think I was very productive at work the rest of the day. And that night, I still met up with some of our friends, and we kind of all just sat in silence, and I don't think anybody hardly said anything.
Yeah.
But it was so shocking because, just as you were saying, there's this girl who's really sweet, who's really nice, and she was a good friend to all of us, and nobody could wrap their mind around why would someone do this to her.
Exactly.
Of all the people, that this kind of thing would happen to, she wouldn't have even typically found herself in the kind of situation where you would see this. And so we, I guess we're just all really in shock. And over the next several months, I think it sort of, I don't want to say put a dark cloud over the whole summer, but it sort of did in some respects. And I think it's been almost 20 years now, and I don't think a month goes by that I still don't think about it.
Yeah.
And it's just been one of those things where I've never had closure on it because we really just don't know what happened.
Yeah.
And it becomes difficult to wrap your mind around the fact that this happened, and here's why. There's no why, and so it becomes that much more difficult to fully, I guess, just fully comprehend what's occurred because there's no answer to some of these questions.
Yes, and I think when things happen unexpectedly like this, and there's a role that this person plays in your life. She was going to be one of my bridesmaids. She was coming home to see friends. She was going to go on to graduate school, eventually probably get married and have kids. And so as all of these milestones pass, it's like the grief is brought back up. So even once you begin to work past the initial shock and horror and upsettedness, and you begin to find a new normal, it just comes crashing back over you, any new milestone that reminds you of it. And for anyone watching, I want you to know that is normal. To just feel sunk down again when you're your button is pushed again when those reminders come up. That's
Mhm.
that's very typical for someone that has experienced the loss of someone that they cared about.
Yeah, and you were talking about you felt guilty. I think that obviously that's another normal emotion is guilt. I think that I felt guilty. Like, well, what if I could have been in Lubbock this year? What if I had gone to Tech and not stayed home and gone to Odessa College? What doesn't matter? What if? I mean, what happens happens. But
I think people can what if themselves into feeling sick, physically sick, wishing they could go back and be in the right place at the right time to prevent something from happening, whether it's an accident, a crime, an illness, something. And you can't do that. We don't have the infinity stones of the Marvel universe. You can't do that. And God doesn't want us to beat ourselves up that way. But Satan really, that's one way he gets his claws into our mind, to get our focus off the healing process, get our focus off where we go from here, and really tries to drag us down.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And I think going along with guilt, another normal emotion is anger.
Oh, yes.
And I think in this situation, there was a lot of anger from me that the cops can't find who did this. Like, what is wrong with them? It's not that hard to solve a murder. Get out there and do it.
Right, in our CSI time frame.
Right, yeah. Well, it doesn't happen like it does on television, right?
Yes, why isn't it solved in 30 minutes like they do on NBC? Yes,
And
it's
then
very frustrating.
There's anger towards the person. How could you have done this to her? And, as a Christian, you're told to love your enemies. And you're told to care about those who persecute you. And you're going, okay, this friend of ours was persecuted. And she went through something horribly traumatic, and this was unjust. There's no way to justify this. It shouldn't have happened in the first place. And somebody's out there knowing that they did this with virtually no consequence.
Right.
And so you're angry that justice isn't being done. You're angry that they haven't been caught. You're angry that they did what they did. And you're angry that she was murdered. You're upset with God because he allowed it to happen.
Yes.
And that plays into what you were getting at the trusting God.
Yes, I spent many evenings with my father talking about God's control over everything. And he's powerful. And nothing, as Christians, nothing can get to us if it's not filtered through his hands. So I was furious that he didn't filter that away from her and filter it out of her life. I didn't want to know what his will was. I didn't care. It was unfair. It was not wanted, and I just couldn't believe that any good could come out of it. And I remember telling my dad, well, if he doesn't close his fingers and allows her to be harmed, what's keeping someone else from harming me? I don't know. At any point, someone could come harm me as well. I can't trust him with anything. That's how that anger turned into distrust for me.
Sure.
And it took, I would say, I want to say it was like 13 years when we finally moved back to Lubbock. We found a church we were going to, and I was reading through the Beatitudes in a women's Bible study. And one of the Beatitudes says, "Blessed is he who is not offended by me." And that hit me square in the chest, because for so many years I was offended by him that he allowed that to happen. And it gave me the reminder that I have to be able to trust in his will. But it was a very long process for me. I held that offense and carried it around for a very long time.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. So I'm not an emotional person really, but I'm also very philosophical and very logical. And so, I think about there's natural evil like tornadoes and hurricanes, etc. And there's moral evil where people do things that are morally wrong. And then I think about the book of Job in Scripture, and I realize that Satan, or as bad as he is, doesn't find Job. God says to Satan, "Hey, Satan, there's Job." And Satan can only do what God allows.
Right.
And so even though you know that there's this demonic power out there, even though you know that there's evil out there, it doesn't happen apart from God's knowledge,
Right.
and it doesn't happen apart from God's allowance. And so the philosopher side of me says, well, God values free will.
Yes.
And because he values free will, people have the ability to choose to do evil things. And I can philosophically understand that. But then you start looking at specific cases of evil, and you go, okay, God, I get that people can do evil, but why did you allow this particular evil to happen?
Right.
And that's probably one of the biggest stumbling blocks for people coming to faith, actually.
Yes.
Is that they've seen so much tragedy in their life that they wonder, how can a good God be out there?
Yes.
And when Job basically tells God, look, I'm just and you're wrong for allowing this to happen to me, God's answer is, I think you have it wrong. And you don't come to me making demands. You come to me as a servant. And you weren't there when I created the world. So I can't expect you to fully comprehend everything. And so when it comes to issues like with Stephanie, I look at that and I say, okay, I can't comprehend why God allowed this to happen.
Right.
But I have to make a decision to either trust that he had a reason, even if I'll never know it, or I have to decide that it shouldn't have happened and God is wrong for allowing it. So am I going to trust God, or am I going to be angry with God
Yes.
over it? And in Scripture, time and time again, you see people who do get angry with God, but then they recognize at some point that the anger is their problem.
Right.
And Scripture says it's okay to be angry, but in your anger, you're not to be sinful.
Right.
And it's one thing to be angry about a situation and to question God. It's another thing to be angry and to accuse God. And so with this particular situation, it took me several years to really go, okay, I'm going to have to be okay with not having all the answers here. And I'm going to have to be okay with realizing that whatever has transpired is beyond the comprehension that I'm ever going to have.
Yeah.
And I think that when you do recognize that you can trust God, despite the fact that things around you are not as they should be, then it allows you to continue moving forward in your relationship with God.
Yeah.
But when you are distrusting God and when you are angry at God, it tends to block your ability to grow closer to the Lord.
Yes.